Paul never thought his quiet suburban life would turn into a waking nightmare. It was a chilly Friday evening when he found himself alone, his wife and children away visiting relatives. A house, usually filled with laughter and noise, was eerily silent. As the clock ticked past midnight, Paul settled into his favorite armchair with a book, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that crept over him. Shadows danced across the walls, and every creak of the old house seemed amplified in the stillness. He tried to focus on the story, but kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see something peering back at him. The power flickered, plunging the room into brief darkness. When the lights returned, Paul felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. He shook it off and decided to make some tea, hoping the warmth would dispel his unease. As he filled the kettle, he noticed a faint reflection in the window, a figure standing at the edge of his yard. He spun around, heart pounding, but the yard was empty. Paul's mind raced. Was it his imagination, or had someone been there? He locked the doors and double-checked the windows, telling himself it was just the wind. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Returning to his chair, he picked up his phone to call his wife, but the signal was dead. Just as he began to panic, there was a soft knock at the door. Paul froze, the sound echoing in the silence. Who could it be at this hour? He approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. No one was there. He opened the door a crack, and a gust of cold air rushed in. The empty street stared back at him, shrouded in darkness. Paul closed the door, his hands trembling. Deciding to check the perimeter of the house, he grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but the familiar outlines of trees and garden gnomes. As he turned to head back inside, he saw it, a set of footprints leading from the back door to the woods. Adrenaline surged through him. Had someone been inside? He followed the footprints, flashlight shaking in his grip. They led deeper into the woods, where the air grew thick with anticipation. Each step echoed loudly in the quiet night. Suddenly, the beam of his flashlight caught something. Another figure, standing still among the trees. Heart racing, Paul shouted, "Who's there?" but received no answer. He inched closer, the figure remaining motionless. As he approached, he realized it was just an old scarecrow, its tattered clothes flapping in the breeze. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. A rustling sound came from behind. Paul whipped around, but saw nothing. Panic set in, and he sprinted back towards the house, the feeling of being followed overwhelming him. He slammed the door shut, bolting it tight. Breathing heavily, he tried to calm down, but the tension in the air was palpable. Suddenly, his phone buzzed, signal restored. He quickly dialed his wife, but the line crackled with static. A distorted voice came through, not his wife's, but a low, menacing whisper. "You're not alone, Paul." The call disconnected, and Paul stood frozen, fear gripping him. His heart raced as he searched the house, but found no sign of anyone else. Every room was empty, yet the oppressive feeling of being watched lingered. Determined to uncover the truth, Paul reviewed the security footage. There he saw it, an unfamiliar figure, slipping in and out of shadows, always just beyond the camera's range. Each sighting coincided with moments he felt most vulnerable, as if the intruder knew precisely when to strike terror into his heart. The realization hit him, this wasn't random. Someone was toying with him, watching his every move, waiting for the perfect moment. He felt trapped, his own home turning into a prison. As the night wore on, Paul's fear transformed into resolve. Whoever was out there, he would not be an easy target. He armed himself with a kitchen knife, eyes scanning every corner of the house. Hours passed, tension mounting, until the first light of dawn broke through the windows. With daylight came a sense of relief, but also the knowledge that his nightmare was far from over. He had to find out who was behind this and why. As he stepped outside, the eerie calm of the morning felt like the calm before a storm. Paul knew he had to delve deeper into the mystery, uncover the secrets lurking in the shadows of his seemingly idyllic life. But with each step he took, the danger grew, and he realized that the terror of being alone at night was just the beginning. As the day progressed, Paul decided to investigate further. He reviewed the footage again, trying to spot any clues. There he noticed a familiar figure lurking, his neighbor Tom. Paul recalled their recent arguments over property lines and felt a mix of anger and betrayal. Determined to confront him, Paul waited until dusk. When he saw Tom leaving his house, Paul approached, knife hidden in his jacket. "Why are you tormenting me?" Paul demanded, voice tense. Tom feigned ignorance, but Paul's persistence broke him. "I wanted you to feel vulnerable, like you made me feel. Tom admitted, eyes cold. "This neighborhood isn't just yours." Realizing how far Tom had gone, Paul felt a chill. He knew confronting him alone might not be safe, but he couldn't let this continue. "Leave me and my family alone, or I'll involve the police," Paul warned, his resolve firm. Tom's expression hardened. "This isn't over," he muttered before retreating into the shadows. Paul returned home, heart still pounding, but he felt a newfound sense of control. He secured his home, knowing that he'd stand his ground. The terror of that night had shifted into a cautious vigilance. Though the fear lingered, Paul was no longer alone in the fight. As he settled back into his armchair, he knew the real battle was just beginning, but he was ready. The darkness outside seemed less daunting, and the walls of his home felt like a fortress once more. The night would bring its challenges, but Paul understood that he held the power to confront whatever lurked in the shadows. Alone at night, but no longer afraid. Gwen always enjoyed her solitude, but tonight felt different. The house creaked more than usual, and shadows seemed to dance across the walls, hinting at unseen movements. She wrapped her cardigan tighter, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. Earlier that evening, Gwen had received an anonymous letter, simply addressed to her home. It contained only a single line, "You are never really alone." She had dismissed it as a prank, but now, every sound felt amplified, every silence oppressive. She tried to distract herself, flipping through channels on the television, but nothing held her attention. The words from the letter lingered in her mind, twisting her thoughts into knots of anxiety. Determined not to let fear control her, she decided to make herself a cup of tea, hoping the warmth would calm her nerves. In the kitchen, the dim light above flickered, casting an eerie glow. As she reached for the kettle, a soft thud resonated from upstairs. Gwen froze, her heartbeat quickening. She strained to listen, but the house had fallen silent again. Mustering her courage, she decided to investigate. Climbing the stairs, each creak of the floorboards beneath her feet sent shivers down her spine. She reached the landing and paused, her eyes scanning the dark hallway. Every door was closed, just as she had left them. She hesitated, her instincts urging her to turn back, but curiosity got the better of her. As she approached her bedroom, she noticed the door slightly ajar, a faint light spilling out. She was sure she had turned off all the lights before heading downstairs. With a trembling hand, she pushed the door open, revealing a chilling sight. Her belongings were scattered, drawers pulled open, and clothes tossed haphazardly. Panic surged through her veins as she backed away, but a soft voice stopped her in her tracks. "Looking for something, Gwen." It was a whisper, yet it echoed in the silent room, sending a cold wave of dread down her spine. She spun around, searching for the source, but the room was empty. Heart pounding, she bolted out of the room, racing down the stairs. The front door felt impossibly far as shadows seemed to close in around her. Fumbling with the lock, she finally managed to open the door, bursting into the cool night air. She paused on the porch, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The street was quiet, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Gwen took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. As she turned to head back inside, a glint caught her eye, a small envelope resting on the porch. With shaking hands, she picked it up, her eyes widening as she read the message inside. "You can't escape what you can't see." Just then, a noise behind her made her whip around. The door slammed shut, and she felt a presence looming behind her, closer than ever before. The night was no longer a refuge, it was a prison, and she was trapped. Gwen's mind raced, piecing together fragments of the night's events. Someone was watching her, toying with her. But who? And why? Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she knew there was no escaping the eyes that followed her, unseen yet ever present. As she stood frozen, the realization dawned on her. This was only the beginning. The true terror lay not in what she could see, but in the shadows that lurked just out of sight, waiting to strike when she least expected it. Gwen took a step back, steeling herself for whatever came next, knowing she had to face her fears head-on. Alone in the dark, with only her wits to protect her, she prepared for the night that would change everything. Gwen took a deep breath, her mind racing. She needed a plan. Retreating to her car seemed like the best option. She turned and dashed towards the driveway, her eyes scanning the shadows for any movement. As she reached her car, she fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking. Finally unlocking the door, she slipped inside and locked it behind her. The interior felt safer, but the darkness outside pressed against the windows, making her feel claustrophobic. Gwen started the engine, the headlights cutting through the night. She took a moment to collect herself, gripping the steering wheel tightly. As she prepared to back out of the driveway, her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Hesitant, she picked it up, her heart sinking as she read the message. Leaving so soon. Panic flared within her, but she forced herself to think clearly. Someone was watching her, tracking her every move. She needed help. Dialing the police, she explained the situation, her voice trembling. They assured her that an officer would be dispatched immediately. Minutes felt like hours as Gwen sat in her car, her eyes darting from mirror to mirror, expecting to see a shadowy figure emerge at any moment. The silence was deafening, each second stretching into eternity. Finally, red and blue lights flashed at the end of the street, a patrol car pulling up beside her. Gwen felt a wave of relief as an officer approached. She rolled down her window, recounting the events of the night. The officer listened intently, his expression serious. "We'll check the area," he assured her. "Stay in your car." As the officer moved towards the house, Gwen watched him disappear into the shadows. The minutes ticked by, and a creeping sense of unease began to settle over her again. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the direction of the house, followed by a chilling silence. Gwen's heart raced. She strained to see through the darkness, but all was still. Just as she was about to call out, the officer re-emerged, his face pale. "There's no one in the house, but it looks like someone's been living in your attic," he said grimly. The revelation hit her like a tidal wave. The unsettling noises, the strange occurrences, it all made sense now. Her sanctuary had been violated, her safety an illusion. "We'll investigate further, but I suggest you stay elsewhere for the night," the officer advised. Nodding, Gwen started her car, driving away with a mixture of fear and relief. She glanced back at the house, the shadows retreating into the distance. As she turned the corner, a single thought lingered in her mind. She might have escaped for now, but the feeling of being watched would haunt her forever. The night felt endless as she drove, the road ahead shrouded in darkness. But Gwen knew one thing for certain: she would no longer be a victim. Whoever had invaded her life had awakened a fierce determination within her. She was ready to face whatever lay ahead, one night at a time. Gwen drove through the night, her thoughts racing. She decided to stay with her friend Lisa, who welcomed her with open arms, sensing her distress. After recounting the night's events, Gwen finally felt a semblance of safety in Lisa's cozy guest room. Despite the exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Every creak of the house made her heart race, and she found herself replaying the events over and over. The feeling of being watched, the letters, the intruder in her attic, each piece was part of a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Morning brought a sense of clarity. Determined to regain control, Gwen contacted a private investigator. She was done being a passive participant in her own life. The investigator promised to look into the letters, the strange occurrences, and any potential suspects who might be involved. Days turned into weeks as the investigation unfolded. Gwen learned to reclaim her space, returning home with added security measures. She refused to be a prisoner of fear any longer. With the support of her friends and the diligence of the investigator, she began to feel the weight lifting. Finally, a breakthrough came. The investigator uncovered a series of connections leading to an old acquaintance from Gwen's past, someone she had barely remembered, but who had harbored a silent obsession. With the help of the police, they confronted him, and he confessed to watching her, driven by a twisted sense of infatuation. As the legal proceedings began, Gwen felt a profound sense of relief. The nightmare was over, and she could finally breathe again. The ordeal had changed her, but she emerged stronger, more resilient, and determined to reclaim her life. Standing on her porch, Gwen looked out at the world with renewed hope. She knew that darkness could creep into anyone's life, but she also knew that courage and determination could dispel even the deepest shadows. As she closed her front door, she left the fear behind, ready to face whatever the future held, unafraid and empowered.